Okay, good afternoon, and thank you for joining our briefing on the City of Philadelphia's response to gun violence. This briefing is for press only. If you are not a member of the media, please log out and watch today's live stream on the City of Philadelphia's Facebook page or tune in via 900 AM WURD or 96.1 FM WURD. We will begin our briefing with remarks by Mayor Jim Kenney. Mayor, you have the floor.
Thanks, Dina, and good afternoon, everyone. Excuse me. This past holiday weekend was incredible in many ways. We gathered with loved ones and we celebrated both Independence Day and our ongoing recovery from the pandemic. But that joy and celebration was marred by the unspeakable violence that ripped through our neighborhoods and through communities all over the country this past weekend. Our hearts are broken for the families, and I urge everyone, for the victims' families, and I urge everyone with information to please report it so we can take violent offenders off our streets and prevent this unspeakable, senseless violence from continuing. Deputy Commissioner Dales and Chief Inspector Benor will provide an update on incidents that occurred over the weekend shortly. Before they do, we want to discuss something we haven't covered much since we first began these briefings in May, but it's something we know is critical to this issue. We know that the key driver of the violence we're experiencing from lack of opportunity, namely lack of ways for some residents to get good paying jobs and build careers that would not only take them off the streets, but also give them a chance at a meaningful life that can make them and their families proud. That's why today, Dr. Ruth Abaya, Injury Prevention Program Manager with the Philadelphia Department of Public Health, will share recent statistics that demonstrate the link to chronic unemployment and violence, particularly among young men. Also joining us from Philadelphia Works is Patricia Blumnauer, Vice President of Operations. For those who are not familiar, Philadelphia Works is the city's workforce development agency tasked with developing solutions to respond to business needs and increase economic opportunity for all Philadelphians. Patricia joins us to share more specifics about workforce opportunities that are available for high-risk groups. And now, Dr. Abaya, I'll turn it over to you for your presentation.
Thank you so much. So thank you all for being here today. As mentioned, I'm going to be discussing some work that we've done in the health department, looking at specifically chronic unemployment and the link to violence. I can go to the next slide. So just to kind of set the context here, as many of us know, this is where we are right now in 2021. Violence has continued to be on an uptick. And because of this, it's been as important as ever to identify upstream preventative factors that we think can not only address the immediate violence that we're facing, but could have longitudinal effects on exposure to violence in years to come. Next slide. So this is some important context to understand our results. What this slide demonstrates is just the way that violence affects certain populations within our city disproportionately, which is, again, a known fact, but something that's a very important piece to understand when we think about the effectiveness of employment, and especially the effect of chronic unemployment on violence reduction. And so what this demonstrates is that both with men and women, and with both men and women, overwhelmingly the burden of firearm violence, the burden of this public health crisis is felt by non-Hispanic Black individuals, followed by Hispanic or Latinx individuals, and then non-Hispanic white individuals. And this trend has been fairly chronic within our city. Although we're going to be focusing on male unemployment because we've demonstrated that that has a particular effect in prior work on violence and on mortality, I do want to make sure that we don't lose sight of what's happening among women and girls in our city as well, and the effect that violence has on that population. Next slide. So the work that we did looking at violence was actually built upon some work that was done in February looking at mortality overall. And what was found there was that chronic unemployment and increased mortality are linked. Overall increased mortality are linked. And so when you look at percentages of individuals who have what's called chronic male unemployment, which is defined as not being employed in the preceding 12 months, what we found was that the higher your percentage in a census tract of those who are chronically unemployed, the higher the mortality was, which is a pretty concerning finding. This relationship was, in this work, found to be most pronounced for men and boys. Next slide. So building on that, we took a look at the city of Philadelphia by zip code focusing on where we see increased numbers of shooting victims and where we see individuals, specifically men and boys, ages 16 to 64, who had not had employment in the past 12 months. And what is very clear when you look at these maps is that on the left, the map in orange, dark orange signifies higher numbers of shooting victims. The map on the right is demonstrating chronic unemployment, and dark teal signifies higher levels of chronic unemployment. And the map shows that the zip codes that have both of these public health problems are ultimately overlapping. The neighborhoods that are outlined in the dark heavy black are overwhelmingly, predominantly Black and African American communities. And then those that are outlined in the white margin are predominantly Hispanic or Latinx communities. And you can see that both of those zip codes that are predominantly either of those demographics are most affected. Next slide. So to summarize these findings, ultimately, there's a strong geographic relationship between where we see high numbers of shooting victims and where we see chronic unemployment in men and boys in Philadelphia. And ultimately, Black and Hispanic communities are most affected, which is consistent with the trends that we discussed several slides ago and consistent with chronic trends we've seen in Philadelphia that we are all very committed to disrupting. In fact, the relationship is so strong that 83% of the zip codes in our city have either, on this map that's demonstrated here in this image, orange or gray. Orange means either both things are high, so shooting victims are high and chronic unemployment is high, or both things are low. There are low levels of shooting victims and there's low chronic unemployment. And so for 83% of the Philadelphia zip codes to have either both things running high or both things running low suggests that there's, again, a very strong geographic relationship between these two issues, which I think gives us some pointed and targeted directions for the future. Next slide. So where do we see this leading us as a city? I think that what we're all committed to doing, kind of as a unified effort, is pursuing targeted and sustainable employment. And I think those two words are critically important because for employment to be sustainable, there are key elements such as training and mentorship that I think are part of the equation. In addition, I think it's important for all stakeholders, and there are a number of them listed here, but there are obviously more. So employers, healthcare providers, violence prevention advocates, community partners, educators, all need to recognize that chronic unemployment is actually a health risk factor. It's a risk factor for poor health outcomes, and it has its roots in structural racism and chronic disadvantage and needs to be disrupted. And then I think that there's a universal need to promote in both the private and public sector just, equitable, and inclusive hiring practices and promotion practices throughout our city. So these are the future directions that I think we're all committed to seeing occur. So thank you so much for allowing us to present these results. So next, I'm going to hand it over to Patricia Blumenauer from Philadelphia Works to speak about their initiatives towards these objectives.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abaya. So Philadelphia Works, as Mr. Mayor mentioned, is the workforce development board for the city, and we truly understand the importance of workforce and employment within the bigger picture of the violence issue in the city. And we're committed to partnering with the city to offer access to opportunities. So there are three major points I wanted to communicate today, and they are that the first is that there are opportunities for employment available. Currently, there are lots of employment opportunities available with wages of $15 an hour or more, and with low barriers to entry, which is newer to us in the city. So there are lots of opportunities available. The second is that there are free workforce services that are available, open to the public daily. And as the city begins to open up more and more, as we respond to COVID, more and more services are opening and expanding and opening their doors to in-person services. And these services include preparing for job application, upskilling, connecting to job training, connecting to services like GED services, connection to transitional jobs, and then connection to actually applying to available jobs. A lot of the pieces that Dr. Abaya just mentioned. And third is the idea that there are specialized services available specifically to those who are at risk and those that we've been talking about today. The PA Career Link centers in Philadelphia are the major access point for folks to get connected with the workforce services that were mentioned. The Philadelphia PA CareerLink centers that are located in Center City, in North Philadelphia, and in Germantown are open. They are taking appointments for in-person services, providing services by phone, and providing services virtually. The West Philadelphia site is currently under construction, but will be opening later this summer. The easiest way to access services or to begin to access services is to call our toll-free number, and that is 833-750-5627. That's the easiest way into the centers. Appointments can be made that way. And beginning later this month, the third week of July, we'll start accepting walk-in appointments as well. So folks will be able to walk up to the centers and see someone immediately. Additionally, as folks begin to transition back to more in-person services, you'll start to see more local community services being offered. So PA CareerLink services in the community. As Dr. Abaya mentioned, location is really important. And we've recognized that the employment services that we're offering haven't always been offered in the neighborhoods that they need to be offered in. So we're expanding that through partnerships with the library, with other community organizations, with places like CDCs, for example, in Frankfurt. And as folks move back to more in-person services, you'll see lots of spaces for CareerLink services in communities such as those. Additionally, the PA CareerLink system has staff available who have specialized training to assist with individuals looking for employment or for workforce services who have involvement with the justice system, who are reentering the community, or who are young people looking for jobs. So we've got services specifically directed for those individuals. These services are available. Folks can talk with individuals to really take a look at where they are, what their situations look like, and then be connected with the services that make most sense for those individuals based on their specific circumstances. Additionally, we have many youth-specific programs, and most of those programs go up to the early 20s, so 21, 24. So lots of services are available. Specifically, we've got NOMO in North Philadelphia, but they serve folks citywide, Philly and Southwest Philadelphia, and Mural Arts, which also serves folks citywide. So very specific targeted programs at young people. Again, all of these services can be accessed by calling our toll-free number at 833-750-5627. And lastly, I just wanted to mention that we will be hosting a number of hiring events over the coming months. The first one that will be coming up is in the Germantown section of the city on July 29th at 10 a.m. We'll be having a job fair at the Germantown PA CareerLink. Information can be found by calling the phone number or heading to the website, which is pacareerlinkphl.org. And there will be lots of opportunities there to connect not only to job opportunities that are available, but also to some of the specific services that I spoke of, including connection to job training and professional development and additional services that might be available, like connection to utilities assistance or financial literacy. So the idea is that the PA CareerLink centers are able to offer these services in a one-stop shop fashion. And with that, I would like to thank you all for listening to the information today, and I will pass this on to Police Commissioner Outlaw.
Thank you, Patricia. While the increase of gun violence in our city has been unconscionable for the past several years, these last few weeks have been particularly harrowing. On June 26, police responded to a house in North Philadelphia for a 10-year-old who fatally shot himself. DC Dales and I responded to the hospital with family there. And then less than a week later, on July 1st, a 10-year-old girl died in a very similar fashion. 2 10-year-old children, kids with their entire lives in front of them, senselessly killed in less than 1 week due to unattended guns being left where they could gain easy access to them. Tragedies such as these have an impact on everyone, from the immediate family to the community and everyone in between. Siblings, parents, grandparents, friends, teachers, doctors, police officers, neighbors, you name it, everyone is affected by these continued tragedies and loss of promising young lives. My prayers are with these families as they continue to grieve these losses. Meeting with parents after incidents like these, it doesn't get any easier. And if anything, these meetings have become increasingly more difficult each time they occur. With that being said, I cannot overemphasize the importance of properly storing weapons and locking them up so that they don't end up in the wrong hands. These recent tragic incidents are a reminder that serious bodily harm and even death can and does happen. I want to encourage people to take all precautions necessary to ensure the weapons being stored inside of their homes are stored away in a safe way. Purchasing safes and gun locks are a step in the right direction. And as you can see here, Dina has provided a slide showing how to obtain a free gun lock through CCIP. For more information about this program, please call 215-800-4611, 215-800-4611. I encourage individuals who are purchasing weapons to please also purchase a gun lock or safe to ensure that their weapon does not end up into the wrong hands. For those who are interested in disposing of a firearm they have and no longer want, there is an upcoming gun buyback on Saturday, July 17th from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. at 2 locations. The first one is at Mount Enon Baptist Church at 500 Snyder Avenue, and the other one is at the Upper Room Baptist Church at 7236 Ogons Avenue. There are no questions asked when you turn these guns in. Those who turn in guns will receive a $100 gift card to Brown ShopRite. Please call 215-667-9870 for more information. Any opportunity to render a firearm safe, either by using a gun lock or turning in an unwanted firearm, is an opportunity to save another life. Unfortunately, the 4th of July weekend showed that there are far too many guns in the wrong hands on our streets. Over the weekend, there were multiple gunshot victims, 35 to be exact. 4 of those shot were juveniles under the age of 18. There were a total of 8 homicide victims over the 4th of July weekend. Since the beginning of the year, Philadelphia has had 1,100, a little over 1,100, about 1,140 gunshot victims. 140 of those were juveniles under the age of 18. Since the beginning of the month, there have been 63 shootings in total. 63 in 7 days. These numbers are absolutely appalling. Just this morning, officers responded to a house in the northwest section of the city where they were met by a complainant that stated someone inside of the house was shot or had been shot. When the officer went upstairs to check on a possible victim, the offender began shooting toward the officer and the initial complainant. That complainant was struck in the upper body and is in stable condition. The officer located a second victim inside of the residence, and that victim is in critical condition at this time. The officer was not hurt and was able to retreat and call SWAT. There were no further injuries, and the offender was taken into custody without further incident. I'm sharing this because this incident is just one of the many examples of the dangers that both police and citizens are facing every day here in our city. And as we continue into the summer months, I ask that you remain vigilant. Know where your children are and know who they're with. I'm asking the community once again to reach out to your officers, talk to them, tell them where the problem areas are in your neighborhood so that we can address those issues before they become unmanageable. Here next to speak about what we're seeing in our pinpoint grids throughout the city is Deputy Commissioner Joe Dales, who is the Deputy Commissioner over Patrol Operations. He will be followed by Chief Inspector Frank Benor, Chief Inspector of the Detective Bureau. And then he will provide details on several investigations that we wish to highlight. DC Dales.
Thank you, Commissioner. Next slide, please. Starting with the citywide homicide and shooting victim stats. If you look at the top of the chart, year to date, as of July 5th of this year, Philadelphia had 1,125 shooting victims. And out of the 1,125, 281 were homicides. In comparison to last year, homicides are up 37%, 281 this year versus 205 last year. And shooting victims are up 28%, 1,125 this year versus 882 last year. Looking at the bottom left of the chart, it shows the motives for the homicides, and they remain the same. The top three: arguments, drugs, and domestics. Domestic is currently up by 189% in comparison to last year. Next slide, please. This slide shows the citywide homicide and shooting victim stats weekly comparison. If you look at the far right, from 6/28 to 7/4, we had 14 homicides, 69 shooting victims, which include shooting incidents that involve multiple shooting victims. To be exact, we had two quadruple shootings, two quadruple shootings, 2 triple shootings, and 6 double shootings. And also this number also includes homicides. And 52 shooting occurrences. The shooting occurrences at the bottom of the chart, that's basically counting the incidents, not the number of victims that occurred throughout the week. Next slide, please. This slide shows the comparison between citywide homicides and homicides that occurred in our pinpoint grids. For those who are watching for the first time, Operation Pinpoint is our overall crime fighting and information sharing strategy that is in alignment with the roadmap for safer communities. Operation Pinpoint is basically a combination of several policing models: hotspot policing, intelligence-led policing, community-oriented policing, and offender-focused policing. And we have over 45 pinpoint grids throughout the city that were identified and established based on data and intelligence that showed high levels of violent crimes within these grids. If you look at the top of the chart, it shows citywide homicides up 37%. And looking at the bottom of the chart, it shows homicides in the pinpoint grids up 9%. Next slide, please. This slide shows the comparison between citywide shooting victims and shooting victims in the pinpoint grids. Citywide shooting victims are up 28%, and the pinpoint grids are down by 11%. Next slide, please. This slide shows the year-end total VOOF arrests for 2017 through 2020, and the total VOOF arrests year-to-date for 2021 from January 1st to July 5th. VUFA is an acronym for Violation of Uniforms Firearms Act. So when you hear me mention VUFA arrest, it basically means the person was arrested for illegally possessing a firearm. So in 2020, we reached an all-time high for VUFA arrests that totaled 2,324. And so far this year, we have made 1,423 VUFA arrests. And I would like to point out that this time last year, we had 851 VUFA arrests, which is a 67% increase, which in comparison to year-to-date total, we're up by 67%. Next slide, please. As of July 2nd of this year, 3,079 crime guns were recovered in our city. A crime gun is any gun recovered by the police as part of a criminal investigation. And I also want to make note that this does not include gun buybacks or gun turn-ins. Last year, we recovered 2,411 crime guns by the end of July, not the middle, but by the end of July last year. Comparing that number to this year's number, which again is 3,079, we are currently showing a 28% increase, which is about 668 more crime guns recovered this year compared to last year from January 1st to the end of July. Next slide, please. And lastly, year to date, 283 privately made firearms, also known as ghost guns, were recovered in Philadelphia. Ghost guns are basically unserialized, unregulated, and untraceable firearms that are assembled by the consumer or someone who assists the consumer as far as putting these guns together. I would like to point out that in 2020, a total of 250 ghost guns were recovered by the end of the year. As of July 2nd, and again, we didn't reach the end of July yet, we have exceeded that number. This shows a significant increase in ghost guns recovered this year in comparison to 2020 and also in 2019, as you can see. So with that, I will now turn it over to Chief Inspector Frank Benor, who is the Chief Inspector of the Detective Bureau, who will speak about cases we wish to highlight.
Good afternoon. The next couple slides, I'm just going to go over a few cases from the weekend that we really could use the public's help as we continue to investigate them. So on Sunday, July 4th at approximately 10:42 p.m., police respond to a gunshot call on the 100 block of South 60th Street in Southwest Police Division. And when the officers did respond, we found 3 shooting victims. 2 of the shooting victims were fatally shot, a Sakir Johnson and a Saladin Muhammad, 21-year-old. Johnson was 23 years old. There was also a 16-year-old shooting victim that was shot non-fatally, and another victim that was injured by fragments that we originally thought was shot but was injured. Our investigation so far reveals that Mr. Johnson was holding an Independence Day anniversary celebration for his business. He was out there on 60th Street. We know that a dark color sedan right now with tinted windows comes to the location. If you want to flip to the next slide, you could see 4 individuals exit that car, which they park on Walnut Street. They walk to the corner. We know now they had firearms. They had lasers connected to some of the firearms, as witnesses report to us. They fire in a northbound direction on 60th Street, and we know the victims are struck. Now, this investigation became pretty complicated. There's a lot of evidence that's out there on the highway. We know now that some of the partygoers, some of the people that were in the crowd, returned fire in this incident in self-defense. So there's a lot of mixed evidence that we need to cull through. Those 4 individuals, though, retreated to that dark colored sedan and then traveled westbound on Walnut Street as they escaped the location. So anyone who had any information on this, we're going to urge them to please give us a call at our tip line, 686-8477, or call the homicide unit directly. But we could use any information. We do have a lot of information coming in, but we know there were a lot of people out there, a lot of people attending the celebration, and we know in the neighborhood people talk. So we're willing to take any information and see if it pieces together with the evidence we have. The next case I wanted to highlight occurred Monday, July 5th at approximately 5:30 in the afternoon. Officers at that time respond to 33rd and Oxford for a report of a shooting. At that time, they find 2 individuals, a 16-year-old and a 15-year-old that had been occupants of a gray Toyota Corolla, along with 2 other teenagers. What we know now is they were traveling in West Philadelphia. They began to be followed by either a burgundy or a red vehicle. That following turned into a pursuit from some of the witnesses and video that we collected. At some point, gunshots rang out. A passerby did do her very best to try to get the 2 individuals, the 16-year-old who was shot in the head and the 15-year-old that was shot in the foot, into her vehicle and tried to get them to the hospital. Police intercepted and continued them along. Unfortunately, the 16-year-old was fatally shot. There's a lot of questions we have with this incident. We recover a firearm in the 3200 block of Oxford that a concerned citizen had pointed out to us. There's evidence out on the highway. There's also some evidence inside the vehicle, the Toyota. So we have a lot of questions. We know people were in the area at the time. It was pretty crowded. So if anyone has information on this, we're going to urge them to call 686-8477. This case is being investigated now by the Homicide Division, as yesterday our victim had succumbed to his injuries. The last thing I wanted to point out is just some more statistics that I know Commissioner Dale's just pointed out, but some of them just pertain to murder and murder arrests, that and just to show you that the homicide unit just keeps working. And as the cases pile up, we are still working on the old cases. This year alone, we made 143 arrests for murder. Now, that isn't clear in 143 cases. Some cases have multiple victims. Some victims are arrested all for the same case, but we charged, along with the DA's office, 143 people for murder. So we're up over 33% in murders. So we continue to work very hard. There's 20 warrants between this year and last year that we have approved by the DA's office that we still have fugitives to find and make sure they're processed for murder. And the very next slide just shows you some of the work they did over this very busy weekend. These 5 individuals were all taken into custody for homicide and charged with murder. Some of these murders occurred this weekend. Some occurred just before. Mr. Kilson, that murder actually occurred yesterday. It occurred in the 12th District on Alden Street. He was involved in an altercation with a male, shot the male inside the property. Through the investigation, he was arrested and charged yesterday. Mr. Mosley was charged for a shooting on Saturday, July 3rd, which occurred in East Division in 2500 block of North 6th Street. There's another incident in East Division that occurs on June 28th, which through investigation on Saturday, a DeVar Little, 18-year-old male, was charged with shooting a male on Kensington Avenue. There's a double shooting that was cleared this weekend that occurred earlier in June, which occurred in a 4900 block of Hoops that actually occurred inside when a male and a woman were found shot multiple times. And Kayla Paskin was charged with arson related to a homicide that occurred in South Philadelphia, where she set a mattress on fire, and that caused the murder of an individual who was living inside the property. So at this point, I'm going to turn things back to Dina.
Thank you. We will now move on to Q&A. Because of limited time, only one representative from each media outlet is permitted to ask questions. Reporters are asked to limit their questions to 3 or fewer. We're going to limit topics in the first round to questions related to the presentations, and if there's time for in a second round, we'll open it up to other topics. We also have Armando joining us for Spanish interpretation if needed. So we'll start with Layla Jones from Billy Penn.
Hi, thank you so much. So my first question is for the mayor. It's regarding New York's emergency declaration, and that was something that activists and council were pushing for in the city. So I want to know if what New York did has influenced whether or not Philadelphia will implement a citywide emergency declaration.
Well, I'm not sure exactly what the extent of the governor's, and I think it was the governor's declaration, not the mayor's. I'm not sure whether or not de Blasio concurred. We'd have to define what a declaration of emergency is and how it would impact law-abiding citizens. If we're talking about shutting down the whole city and then putting a curfew on every neighborhood in the city where people cannot move about freely, I don't know if we're going to be able to do that. If there are ways to selectively deal with particularly high crime areas, I don't know whether or not that's constitutional or not to be able to select particular neighborhoods. So there's a whole range of questions, legal questions and practical questions that would need to be answered and whether or not that would even be effective. So we have to see what New York is actually doing. I saw the governor Cuomo this morning making the announcement. I was on my way out the door, so I don't have the specifics of what that announcement is. But if we're talking martial law, I don't think that that's going to be doable.
Is there a process by which the city can figure out what an emergency declaration would look like for us? And do you as mayor have influence over whether or not that would be what you called martial law or something else, for example, some of the things outlined in the council resolution?
Well, I mean, I'm again, the definition of what the emergency declaration would encompass needs to have a conversation about that and what people are willing to deal with when it comes to having them have to stay in their house after a particular time. There are restrictions on their movement around the city. It's a really difficult civil liberties issue. I'm sure anything like that would be challenged by civil liberty advocates, and understandably so. So I don't have a full answer for you at the moment, but I think simply throwing out things like that doesn't necessarily solve the problem. I think what we've been dealing with relative to a historic investment in investments in job training and other types of things that will allow people to choose a different life, I think is better than locking down the whole city.
Thank you so much. And I had one more question for Patricia, who spoke earlier. I don't want to try to butcher your last name, but thank you. I wanted to know through Philly Works, which of those initiatives that you mentioned were new, and then kind of what's the disconnect between the at-risk populations that you all work with and this excess of job opportunities that you talked about?
So the new services are services that are specifically in the local communities. So that is something that we've been working to expand over the last several years, but there's been a specific focus on neighborhoods that have been in need of these services, so that the rollout of those services are new. And a specific example of another service that is new, I mentioned the provider Philly. That's a brand new service that we've just started, or a brand new provider that we've just started working with in the last several months. And then we'll continue to expand those services to other neighborhoods and with other providers. And in terms of the disconnect to the available job opportunities, that's been a challenge that we're seeing across the city. And I wouldn't say that it's just with a specific population. It has been very challenging during the pandemic time to connect folks with open job opportunities. We are hoping that as there are more in-person services that are available, that folks will be more inclined to come in and work with our staff to get connected with the job opportunity, because we know that it's been challenging to get folks connected with opportunities that were being presented through remote and virtual access.
Great. Thank you all so much.
Okay, thanks, Layla. Now we're going to move on to Isabel Sanchez with Telemundo.
Hola, ¿qué tal, Armando? Buenas tardes. ¿Cómo estás? Mi pregunta es para la doctora Ruth Abaya. Sé que ya lo mencionó en inglés, pero me interesaría tenerlo en español, hablando acerca de esa incidencia del desempleo crónico en comunidades latinas. Si podría, por favor, ella tocar base y explicarnos cómo esto afecta a nuestras comunidades latinas y lo que se podría hacer para solucionar ese problema. Me encantaría poder tener esa respuesta en español. Gracias.
Cómo no, Isabel. Dr. Abaya, this is for you, and this hasn't already been mentioned in English, but our colleague would like the Hispanic community to have access to the information you provided in regards to the incidence of chronic unemployment, especially in the Latin community, and what is being done in order to resolve this issue.
Sure. So we'd be happy to make the information we provided available. I think when we provided demographic breakdowns, that was pertaining to violence in various communities, and we can certainly make that available. I believe the slides have been made available by Dina. As far as what's being done, so I think it's a great observation. What we noted was a geographic trend, right? And so there definitely are certain communities that are predominantly affected. So the goal, in partnership with organizations like Philadelphia Works, is to target the interventions as well. So to make sure that some of the interventions and some of the specific initiatives that Patricia mentioned are not just universally available, which is important, but also that there are specific recruitment efforts that are being made in some of those communities that were outlined in white.
La información que había mencionado anteriormente tenía más que ver con la demografía, la información demográfica con respecto a la violencia en nuestras comunidades. Pero esa información puede estar disponible. Lo que sí noto es que hemos encontrado que hay tendencias geográficas en la dispersión de la información, y hay que ciertas comunidades que son afectadas más que otras. Obviamente nosotros tenemos ciertas asociaciones con comunidades, con asociaciones comunitarias, y vamos a trabajar con ellos. Como ha mencionado Patricia, hay iniciativas que ya están enfocadas en resolver este problema, la conexión entre el desempleo y la violencia. Y por supuesto, a estar disponible esto en mayor detalle si nos contactas para dar la información.
Listo, muchas gracias, Armando, te agradezco, gracias.
Okay, thank you. Next, we'll move over to Denise Clay Murray with the Philadelphia Sunday Sun.
Good afternoon, everyone. My question is for Dr. Abaya. You mentioned in your presentation that there was overlap between chronic unemployment and people being subject to gun violence. Has that reflected in the amount that the city has had to spend on covering the costs of gun violence in such ways as shooting, hospitalizations, and different things, because if most people get their health insurance through their job.
So that's a good question. That's not part of the analysis that we did, but I think that it's a reasonable conjecture. Ultimately, we know that the cost of gun violence is related to the overall numbers. When we see things like the emergency room burden, ICU visits, et cetera, go up, we know that that's associated with cost. And a lot of the cost that we see is kind of borne collectively. We're still learning about the insurance status of people who are victims of violence, but we have no reason to believe that would not be part of the cost. And I just want to make one comment about financial costs, which I think is only one part, and in some ways the least significant part of the cost, right? There's the human cost, and then there's also such a profound cost in regards to things like chronic mental health needs, which also need to be paid for, the relationship between unemployment and housing instability, which also needs to be paid for. So I think that there's more work to be done in that space.
Thank you. My next question is for Commissioner Outlaw. You showed us the slide with the gun lock, where you can get a gun lock. Are those free? And if not, are there places where you can get a free gun lock?
Yeah, so Dina put that slide up. They are free gun locks. That's through CCIP, and we can push out additional information about those gun lock programs. We'll have to circle back with you on the others.
Okay. Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, Denise, in the chat, there should be a link to the files as well. It has the flyer about the CCIP gun lock program, and we can get you more information on others.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Next, we'll move on to Kristen Johanson with KYW.
Hi there. So this may be both for the mayor and the police commissioner first. So it seems that there's, and you may not have the information exactly handy, which I understand, but it seems that there's some victims, shooting victims that still have pending autopsies, like months after they've been shot, or what they're known as S numbers over months and months. Do you guys know why there's a delay within the medical examiner's office? And then can you explain what S numbers mean? Because it's kind of been going all over Twitter about what S numbers are.
I honestly have no idea what that is, what an S number is. And certainly we'll make an immediate request to the medical examiner's office to find out what the delay is, if there are. And I don't know whether Chief Inspector Venor is more closely associated with the work of the medical examiner and has anything to add, or Tumar, whether you do, but I'll certainly make an inquiry myself.
I'd be glad to address the S numbers. That's our designation. Instead of making something a murder, if it's not a murder, we will keep it as an S number because, for instance, I'll give you an example. We have a video. We had a decedent show up with a gunshot wound. We didn't make it a murder right away. He was armed with a firearm. We watched the video, and that video showed that he was in the process of robbing someone. That person shot him. That's not a murder by definition by the FBI. So we keep that as a special assignment. As far as when things go to the medical examiner's office, if toxicology is needed to show cause of death, there's going to be a delay. Most cases, we do put our gunshot stuff right through. If the gunshot was not the cause of death, then they have to wait for toxicology. A lot of times that's outsourced and it takes some time.
I don't have nothing in addition to that to add, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Kristen, you're muted.
Yeah. Oh, there it is. Okay. It wasn't letting me unmute. Sorry about that. So also at a lot of these press conferences, and this is for both the mayor and the commissioner, it's often mentioned that there is an increase in guns, that the guns are the major problem. There's a general call for stricter gun laws. But then on the flip side, a lot of police officials, and I think we've heard it in previous reporting, that the BUFA arrests and gun arrests aren't being upheld in court. One captain recently just tweeted that there were 303 BUFA arrests in 2019, 2018 in his districts, but only 2 got actual state sentences. So again, this is kind of to both of you, but I know the commissioner has mentioned before that she's tracking the gun possession cases through court. Commissioner, have you been in touch still with the DA, and I know I've asked you this question before, but what has that looked like, tracking and making sure that there's as you put it, stick to versus a carrot to the gun issue?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I don't have the updated stats on that one, but I do know that the trend lines are still going in the opposite directions. I still believe that there needs to be very firm consequences. Far too many times when we review these shootings on a weekly basis, we find out that either the victims or the offenders have open VUFA cases or multiple VUFA cases that might not be open, but there's clearly a pattern there. And so that statistic has not changed. I do know that in our regular meetings with the DA's office, we review these cases, and we believe that our enhanced communication is showing improvement on our end in what the DA's office is looking for in order to have these cases charged. But I still believe, and very wholeheartedly, that the trend lines are going in the opposite direction. We're getting far too many illegal guns off the street. We know that this is getting illegal guns off the street is a tried and true strategy. But again, police are just solely spinning our wheels. If we're getting the guns off the street, we're getting the people off the street that are illegally carrying these firearms, and nothing is happening as far as serious consequences. And again, we're not talking about someone who's carrying and, let their license expire or lapse for a short period of time. We're talking about people with serious violent history. And we are all for prevention. We're all for intervention wholeheartedly, but there has to be a stick for those who are most violent, because we know that there's a very small percentage of individuals that's driving the violent crime here in the city.
But this is also a team effort, and each part of the team needs to work. I mean, the police department has their responsibilities in investigating crime, getting guns off the street, and trying to intercept and get between people who are going to shoot each other or be shot. It's the social service end of it, with the investments that we made with city council and our administration made together to increase the opportunities for people to get what they need on a social service level so they don't go in that direction. And also the courts are a major part of it. And I think that during the period of time the courts weren't operating, a lot of folks were just, kind of understood that they weren't going to come before a judge or anyone to have to explain themselves or perhaps be jailed. And I think as the courts open up more and more, I think we're going to see an improvement in that number. But unless the court system, the DA's office and the courts hold up their end also, that's also part of the same team.
Commissioner, can you give any insight into kind of what the DA's, I know you can't probably give away a lot, but is there something, I know he's talked about in previous press conferences about specific technologies that he didn't want to get into. Can you give any insight into what, I guess, the discussions are that we're supposedly missing as a city?
You're muted.
When we're talking about, sorry about that, I was muted. You think I'd have that down by now? Not at this point. When it relates to technology, it's talking about furthering the use of certain types of analyses by the forensic labs. I think I've presented out on this topic at public hearings on more than one occasion, and its feasibility and our ability to do that. But a lot of it also, in going back and doing quality assurance on these cases, is, just depending on what it is, making sure that specific types of evidence that the DA's office is looking for is included in these cases when we present them for charging.
Thank you both.
Okay, thank you. Now we'll move on to Anna Orso with the Inquirer.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for taking time today. This question is, I believe, for the mayor or anybody else from the administration who wants to jump in. With more than 200 people shot in June and already another 60 in July, we appear to be in a continuation of the surge in violence that I guess peaked last summer and seems to not really have slowed down. One of the theories to explain that has been the stress and fallout related to the pandemic, but that's now sort of winding down. So, do you have any thoughts on why the city's level of violence persists, even at this point in time? And, I'm curious, beyond some of the longer term approaches that are being funded in this next budget, what are the sort of immediate strategies or steps that you want to highlight that are addressing this issue right now?
Well, first of all, I would just argue that I don't think the pandemic and the effects of the pandemic are over. I think obviously the infection rates are down. and people are not getting sick or are not getting sick and hospitalized. But I do believe that the trauma and issues surrounding the pandemic are still with us, are going to be with us probably for another, 5, 7, 10 years. So I think that's still at play. I do believe, again, that this is a continuum of effort between the police department that are on the street, our violence intervention folks, group violence intervention folks that are interacting now with the public and can interact more freely now that the pandemic is subsiding, which they were not able to do last year. Continuing to work with our community partners, clergy, community groups, trying to intercede with our young people, and also now the more robustly funded programs that we can expand and expand both the depth and reach of those programs, like job training and trauma counseling and all those issues. In addition to that, again, as I said earlier, the courts, getting back in swing and putting more people away that need to be put away. When you carry an illegal gun 3, 4, 5 times, clearly your propensity to violate the law is clear, and I think you need to be incarcerated. So all those things together is the kind of teamwork necessary to quell this violence and get these numbers back down.
Erica, was there anything that you wanted to add about GVI specifically? I know that is better funded now, or is going to be. What does that translate to in terms of how many residents or folks the program can serve, and what does that look like, in the month of July or August? Is that a short-term intervention?
Erica, you'd like to take a look?
Yeah. So, hey, Anna. And so I'm going to answer that question, and I'm going to answer the first question. And so immediately in terms of GVI, absolutely being able to, we're looking to do a stand up of a traditional call-in for GVI, where we bring all the identified members of a group into a location at once and address the issues and do different from the individualized approach, doing the group approach, letting them understand what we know is happening, the intel that we have, as well as the resources that are available. I do think culturally that will make a shift in what we're seeing kind of with GVI and the individuals that are involved in groups or gangs. However, all of our violence is not group related. As it relates to some of the immediacy in interventions you will see, or interventions that we know work, Dr. Abaya, who is the co-chair for the Roadmap to Safer Communities, and myself, are real hospital-based interventions. And so what is happening in our trauma centers that we can then engage with individuals who are shooting, who are being shot, in their families, in their loved ones, to ensure that we're mediating retaliation, we're giving them the trauma supports that they need, as well as the physical supports and services they need because of the gun violence that they've seen. I also want to really talk about, in terms of the uptick in gun violence we're seeing on a national level. I've said this before, and I will continue to stand and die on this hill. Gun violence is a symptom of a greater issue of divestment in communities, particularly Black and Brown communities and neighborhoods. The epidemic of COVID has exacerbated those issues that we see in neighborhoods in terms of lack of opportunity, lack of education, and disconnection from support services. And so until we are willing to play the long and short game around the issue of gun violence, we're going to continue in this cycle. And I think we're on the right path in the short-term interventions like GVI, like our community crisis intervention team, like our town watch and community training, like our hospital-based interventions. But the long game is about economic opportunity, training, and hospital-based and
Got it. Thank you. I just have one last question for the mayor. I want to follow up on Layla Jones's questions regarding the disaster declaration. I've talked to a couple advocates and council members who have pointed to the fact that there was a disaster declaration declared in 2018 in just Kensington that I believe established an operations center and an emergency response team, among, I guess, plenty of other initiatives. What was different about that And, was there a civil liberties issue there?
I assume that I see it. It has to do with what people think of the disaster declaration is and what it will accomplish. If it will set up a situation where people are restricted to their homes, who are law-abiding people who just going to work and school, that is not something we're looking for. I just perused New York's disaster declaration from the governor. I really don't understand what it says. It just seems that it's verbiage that keeps on repeating itself. So we will look at that a little further. And I believe that what the difference between 2018 was that people were in direct and are in direct harm's way when it comes to heroin injection and overdose. And it was an attempt to get people in before they actually killed themselves by overdosing. But this is a citywide issue, and it would affect almost many neighborhoods in the city. And we'd have to figure out what that impact was before we would move forward in anything like that.
Thank you.
And, Mayor, let me just add that a lot of that work, and I think it was a little confusion from folks about exactly what that declaration or what that work was. A lot of that was allowing us to be able to coordinate our internal departments in a way, all working towards one effort. And we've learned lessons from that. And also, that we have that in place with the violence prevention team. Erica and her staff coordinate those same type of interdepartmental gatherings every week and look at different police districts to where they meet with the city commissioners and not the city commissioners, my apologies. They meet with commissioners of departments of city government along with the police captains and go through that area and try to figure out what resources we need in those areas outside of PPD that can help with these efforts. So a lot of that activity around 2018 in the Resilience Project and what folks like to qualify as a state of emergency was us being allowed to coordinate our departments in a way working towards that goal and effort that the mayor said around reducing the number of overdose deaths and the public safetyness in that area. So I think there's a lot of confusion around what a state of emergency will do from a city. As the mayor stated, this was what you all are talking about in New York came from the governor. And from the little bit that I perused while we were on this call, it also come with additional resources. So we will welcome that if that was something that the state governor wanted to do. But like the mayor said, if you're talking about doing a local one, you got to really talk about what's the intention, how could you do it, and what type of elements would be in place.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. We'll move on to Chris O'Connell with Fox.
Afternoon, everyone. Mayor, I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but I did want to go back to the emergency declaration. I just wanted to be clear. Has there been any communication with the governor's office for any kind of emergency declaration? Because I know you mentioned your concerns with civil liberties. You mentioned the city looking like a citywide lockdown, but a declaration could also mean funding for programs. Has there been any discussion in terms of funding, immediate funding for programs right now when it comes to an emergency declaration? Are you in touch with the state at all?
No, have not talked to the governor about this. We've been trying to deal with this as best we can ourselves with our own resources. In addition to that, we're anticipating some potential additional resources with the federal government, with the Biden administration, which we hope to meet sometime this month to figure out what it is there is available from them. But I have not talked to the governor about it to date.
Chris, but let me add that. Chris, let me add a little fine point to that. While we haven't talked to the governor's office, we've certainly been in conversation with some of our state delegation and our legislators, both on the Senate and the House side, around this issue and around funding. And I believe there was money put into the state budget for violence prevention. So we're working with those same Philadelphia delegation legislators to sort of figure out what that funding, what particular fund it is, how much may come to Philadelphia, and what will we need to do to be able to access it.
Thanks, sir. A question for either the commissioner or Chief Inspector Venor. Just anecdotally, talking with some of your officers on the street, could you describe some of the firepower being used in some of these shootings? I know that some of these shootings had, laser sightings with like possible military grade. One officer told me out of his mouth, we're out armed out here. Do you see an increase in the number of the caliber guns? And has there recently been some sort of large theft of weapons that we're seeing so many firearms arrests? I'd just like to get what kind of guns we're seeing out there. It seems like it's high power.
Chris, thank you for that question. Before I'll turn it over to Chief Inspector Venora, I would agree with you. And, of all of these scenes that I've responded to, I've seen a wide range of firepower that's been used, in addition to the privately made firearms that we're also seeing that folks know can't be traced. Chief Venora, is there anything else you'd like to add to that?
One of the things I'd like to add is that every single day I come in and I read the reports that are generated by the detectives, and it seems like more and more people just leave their guns in cars and they walk. And those same guns are the guns we're facing every day. People got to take a little more responsibility, not only if they have a little kid in the house, as we've seen 2 10-year-olds that were killed in the past week and a half, but there's guns left in cars every day, and almost every one of them that I read were carelessly left under a seat, in a glove box, and they're taken and they're later recovered as part of the crime. So, we're seeing assault rifles. We're seeing a lot of different things. Just this week, there's a range. That one case I went over, there was over 100 fired cartridge casings just in that one case.
And many of these guns should never be in the hands of civilians, period. And that's part of the problem that we face nationwide.
I do have one other question in terms of what, I talk to people on the street every day, and unemployment and things like that, job training are great things, very, important to the equation. But everyone wants to know what's being tonight, what's being done right now. And I guess this goes into terms of programs this summer. I am right now outside of what Dr. Abaya was talking about, the NOMO Foundation. There's 50 kids I'm looking at right now that won't get shot tonight because they're inside eating a healthy meal and watching a movie and air conditioning, and they're going to be here for a while. So these things work. What money is being put into tangible programs like this, and can we expect more of this, because these programs really seem to work?
We just finished our budget process and appropriated, I think, $158 million more in these types of programs.
Not only that, Mayor, we have our targeted community investment grants, which we've done kind of year over year. We do have a call that's open now for the next 3 weeks. We've funded over 100 of community organizations like NOMO, who are doing work on the ground, who are in their communities, who know their communities. We know those who are closest to the problem are also closest to the solution. And we understand the importance of funding those organizations through our targeted community investment grant.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Chris. We're going to move on to Matt Petrillo from CBS 3.
Hi, good afternoon to you. Thank you for your time. Mayor, I talked to Sakar Johnson's mother. He was the victim, one of the 2 men shot and killed in that barbecue in West Philly, 4th of July. She was saying how she wants to see, more police on the street. The department has 300 vacancies for officers. Can you tell me why there are so many vacancies in the city's police department?
Well, first of all, it's a very difficult job, and officers have gone through a very difficult time in the last year plus. Many have decided to not do this job anymore. It's difficult to recruit people into this profession in this particular environment. People who have the opportunity to choose to do other things tend to now do other things as opposed. Honestly, the bill the council passed recently, limiting recruitment of police officers to Philadelphia residents only, is going to even hamper our ability to go nationwide to the military, to historic Black colleges and universities, and other places within our country to attract people who want to be in law enforcement. So we're in a difficult, and I guess Commissioner Outlaw could speak more clearly to this, but we're in a very difficult time in trying to find police officers and retaining officers. And then you're dealing with kind of the concept of defunding the police, which we haven't done here, but that's also a pressure. I don't know how you hire more police and defund the police at the same time. It seems incongruous.
Can you or the commissioner explain what's being done to hire more officers?
Commissioner, you want to talk about some new classes that we're trying to recruit?
Sure. I'll also add to that, Mr. Mayor, that, we don't have the same authorized strength that we had just a year ago. So, while some folks might say that we weren't defunded, our authorized strength, quite frankly, isn't what it was. And it was because our authorized strength was not restored during this last cycle. So in addition to having fewer officers or fewer openings that we had a year ago, we're seeing people out on long-term injury. We're losing people through regular attrition. And then, as the mayor said, just the narrative out there nationally that we're all working within makes this a very difficult job. And those individuals that have the ability to retire have said, you know what, I'm out. I'm going to retire. We have worked with the city to have the ability to extend those folks who are in the drop program by a year. So that's something that we're doing to hold on to the institutional knowledge that we have. But then also we recognize that we had to be far more intentional about our recruiting and our marketing, meeting people where they were. And we identified several areas where we were losing people in the process. For example, if people had struggles or challenges with the physical portion of that, we're partnering with local YMCAs to help people on the front end get in shape so that they can be successful through the police academy. And then also we were losing a lot of people on the reading test. And so we recognized early on that we had to work with them via workshops to help them prepare for that test. And then also reaching out to our local academic institutions here. So we're doing more with meeting people on the ground and again, identifying where people were falling out of the process and making sure we identify and work with them early on, identify those individuals and work with them early on. But to be clear, we have individuals saying in our community, and rightfully so, they want to see us more, but not necessarily recognizing that we don't have the same numbers to work with. So anytime we ramp up an operation or a detail for ATV or dirt bikes or increase visibility around a rec center or a particular neighborhood that's experienced increases in shootings or other sorts of violent crime, it all comes at a cost, meaning that oftentimes we're taking those officers from somewhere else to place them in a new location.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have Mike Donofrio with the Philadelphia Tribune.
All right, thanks. I just have 3 quick questions here. I guess the first one is for the mayor. Do you think the city can fully reopen from the pandemic without reducing these high levels of gun violence?
I think the city is fully reopened now. And the only way we're going to be able to have job access and ability to hire, to employ people is to be fully opened. The only way we're going to be able to restore our revenues that we lost during the course of the pandemic on wage tax and other taxes is if we're fully open. The only way we're going to be able to employ people in restaurant, tourism, hospitality is to be fully open. So we're fully open now and trying to get people back to work and give them more opportunities to make an honest living as opposed to being in the criminal life.
All right, then maybe if I'll just use this as a second question then. How do you think the high homicide rate or just violence rate in the city is going to, do you think it's going to prevent people from, participating in nightlife, returning to in-person work, or hurting the cities in any other way as it?
Well, I mean, my main concern is we're losing a generation of young people. The other things are ancillary to the actual loss of life and the loss of children and the loss of people to their families. So yeah, I mean, it hurts all of us, but it should not stop our attempts and abilities to regenerate business and to get people working and to get the tax revenues flowing again. So we have more money to be able to spend on programs to keep people out of trouble and keep the cycle of poverty from continuing.
All right. And then lastly, just jumping off the previous questions on the emergency order, would you welcome Governor Wolf declaring an emergency order over gun violence like Cuomo? And at the very least, bring more funding and state resources to address violence. I know, considering you said you weren't very clear on what Cuomo's order will do. I would always accept more resources from the state government, and the state government could do one more thing for us and to allow us to
to abolish straw purchasing of weapons and to get assault weapons off the street. I mean, I do appreciate the state's potential in providing economic resources, but the biggest thing they can do for us is get these rotten guns off the street and keep them out of people's hands.
All right, thank you.
All right, thanks, Mike. That concludes today's briefing. We will reconvene in 2 weeks on Wednesday, July 21st. Take care.